The message arrived on Earth at exactly 3 in the morning. It came through every communication channel at once, breaking through firewalls and security systems like they were made of paper. The words were simple and direct. The human called. Daniel Cole will present himself before the Dominion Council on Vareth Prime within 30 standard rotations. Failure to appear will result in consequences. Daniel Cole was 53 years old. He had gray hair at his temples and calm brown eyes that never seemed to show fear. He had been a schoolteacher before first contact, then a translator, then a negotiator, and finally an ambassador. He was not a soldier. He was not a scientist. He was just a man who was very good at listening and even better at remembering what he heard. When the military commanders gathered in the emergency meeting room, they wanted to send warships. When the politicians gathered in their own meeting room, they wanted to send apologies. Daniel sat quietly in the corner, writing in a small leather notebook until someone finally asked him what he thought. "I think I should go," he said. Alone. The room exploded with arguments. The Verthan were known throughout the galaxy as conquerors. They had destroyed 12 species in the last 1,000 years. They commanded a fleet of 40,000 warships. Sending a single human to face them was not diplomacy. It was suicide. Daniel listened to all of this. He wrote a few things in his notebook. Then he said, "They want to scare us. If we send warships, we look aggressive. If we send apologies, we look weak. But if we send one man with a notebook, we look like something they have never seen before. We look like we are not afraid." 3 weeks later, Daniel's shuttle landed on Vareth Prime. The planet was beautiful in a terrible way. The sky was the color of blood, and the mountains in the distance looked like broken teeth. The spaceport was enormous, built to handle ships much larger than anything humanity had ever constructed. Armed guards stood everywhere, their weapons pointed at Daniel as he walked down the ramp. A young woman named Laura Bennett walked behind him. She was 28 years old and had been assigned as his assistant only 2 days before departure. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her face calm. Daniel had told her that was the most important thing. "They will be watching everything we do," he had explained. "Every expression, every movement. So we give them nothing to work with." A Verthan official met them at the bottom of the ramp. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with gray skin and eyes that had no pupils. His mouth was full of small, sharp teeth that he showed when he spoke. "A council is waiting," he said through the translation device attached to his throat. "You will follow me. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will show proper respect to the High Arbiter." Daniel smiled politely. "Of course. Lead the way." They walked through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. The ceilings were impossibly high. The walls were covered with images of conquered worlds and defeated enemies. Every few meters, there was another guard, another weapon, another reminder that humanity was nothing compared to the Dominion. Laura leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "Are you seeing all of this?" "Yes," Daniel replied quietly. "And I am remembering it." The council chamber was the worst of all. It was a massive room with black pillars that stretched up into darkness. The floor was polished so smooth that Laura could see her own reflection, small and insignificant. At the far end, raised on platforms that were at least 20 meters high, sat the members of the Dominion Council. There were 7 of them. They wore robes that glowed with soft light, and their faces were impossible to read. In the center, on the highest platform, sat High Arbiter Kethvon. He was old even by Varathan standards, with skin that had turned almost white and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. "The human arrives," Kethvon announced. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "We expected you to run. We expected you to hide. We expected you to beg for mercy from a distance. But here you are." Daniel walked to the center of the room and stopped. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He simply stood there, looking up at the council with the same calm expression he had worn since landing. "Thank you for the invitation," he said. "It is an honor to be here." Kethvan made a sound that might have been laughter. "Honor? You do not understand your position, human. You are here because we have decided to give your species one chance. One opportunity to surrender peacefully before we take what we want by force." Daniel reached into his pocket. Every guard in the room raised their weapon, but all he pulled out was his notebook and a pen. "Do you mind if I take notes?" he asked. "I want to make sure I understand everything correctly." The council members looked at each other. This was not how conquered species behaved. They were supposed to tremble. They were supposed to plead. They were not supposed to ask for permission to write things down. "What is that object?" one of the council members demanded. "A notebook," Daniel explained. "It is made of paper, which comes from trees. And this is a pen. It makes marks on the paper. Very old technology, I know, but I find it helps me think." Kethvan leaned forward. "You mock us." "Not at all. I simply want to give your words the attention they deserve." Daniel opened the notebook to a fresh page and clicked his pen. "Please, continue. You were saying something about surrender." Lavra stood frozen behind her ambassador. She had studied Varathan psychology. She knew that they responded to fear, that they fed on it like a drug. An enemy who showed no fear was something outside their experience. She could see the confusion spreading across the council, members like a disease. Kethvan stared at the human for a long moment. Then he smiled, showing all of his teeth. "Very well," he said. "Let us begin. And let us see how long your courage lasts when you understand what we are capable of." Daniel smiled back. His pen was ready. His notebook was open. "I am looking forward to it," he said. And he meant every word. Kethvan held Daniel in the air for a long moment, his clawed hand tight around the human's throat. The council chamber had fallen silent. Every guard, every official, every member of the council watched and waited. "You should kill me," Daniel said, his voice strained but still calm. "That is what you are thinking. One quick squeeze and this problem goes away." The High Arbiter's grip tightened slightly. "Give me one reason why I should not. Because my death would prove everything I just told the galaxy. The Dominion threatens. The Dominion destroys, and when someone stands up to them, the Dominion murders them in cold blood." Daniel managed a small smile despite the pressure on his throat. "My survival is an inconvenience. My death would be a recruitment tool." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kethvan released his grip, and Daniel fell to the floor, gasping for air. Lavra broke free from the guards and rushed to his side, helping him to his feet. "Explain," Kethvan commanded. "Explain what you have done before I change my mind about letting you live." Daniel rubbed his throat and took several deep breaths. When he spoke, his voice was rough but steady. 12 years ago, humanity made first contact with alien life. It was a merchant vessel from the Arathi Federation, lost and damaged after an accident. We helped them. We repaired their ship, gave them supplies, and sent them home with a message of friendship. "The Arathi," Kethvan repeated. "You mentioned them yesterday." "I did. Since then, we have been building relationships. Quietly, carefully, without drawing attention. The Arathi, the Crystalline Collective, the merchant guilds of Nexus Station, even some of your own subject species, through back channels they thought were secure." One of the council members made a strangled sound. "That is impossible. We monitor all communications." "You monitor communications that go through normal channels," Daniel corrected. "But space is very large, and there are many ways for information to travel. Smuggler routes, diplomatic pouches, messages carried by travelers who do not know what they are carrying. Daniel straightened his jacket, which had become wrinkled during Kethvan's attack. For 12 years we have been preparing for this moment. Not building warships, though we have done that too. Building something more important. Building trust. He turned to look at the assembled council, meeting each of their eyes in turn. The transmission I sent included everything you showed me yesterday. Your fleet numbers, your supply routes, your military capabilities. That information is now in the hands of every species within 200 light years, including many who have dreamed of resisting you but never had the courage to try. They will not act, Kethvan said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. They are afraid of us. They were afraid of you, Daniel agreed, because they thought they were alone, because they believed that resistance was impossible. But now they know something different. Now they know that a small, young species from a planet called Earth was willing to stand before your council and say no. Lavra spoke up for the first time since the confrontation began. Her voice was shaking, but she forced the words out. Ambassador Patricia Mills is currently meeting with the Arathi government. Ambassador Kevin Brooks is with the Crystalline Collective. Dr. Hannah Price finalized a mutual defense treaty with 3 other species just yesterday. Daniel nodded. The Arathi have agreed to open their borders to human ships. The collective has shared certain technologies that will help us strengthen our defenses. And 18 hours ago, a coalition of 7 species signed an agreement promising to support each other if any one of them is attacked by the Dominion. The council chamber was absolutely silent. Even the guards seemed frozen in place. You came here expecting to frighten me, Daniel continued. You expected me to go back to Earth and tell my government the resistance was hopeless, that our only choice was surrender. Instead, I am going to tell them the truth, that the Dominion is strong, but not invincible, that their supply lines are stretched thin, that their subject species are restless, and that they have never faced a coalition of free peoples fighting for their homes. Kethvan descended from his platform, moving slowly until he stood directly in front of Daniel. Up close, the High Arbiter was even more imposing. His skin was like carved stone, and his eyes burned with ancient anger. You think this changes anything? He asked quietly. We have destroyed species more powerful than your little coalition. We have crushed rebellions that made your efforts look like children playing games. Maybe, Daniel said, but every one of those rebellions weakened you. Every conquest cost you ships and soldiers. And now you face something new, an enemy that knows your weaknesses and has had 12 years to prepare. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his notebook. It was battered now, the leather cover scuffed from being dropped on the floor. But the pages inside were still intact. This notebook contains everything I have learned about the Dominion since I arrived. Your military structure, your political divisions, the tensions between your council members that I observed during our conversations, the names of your subject species that might be willing to rebel if given the chance. Daniel held the notebook out to Kethvan. You can take this if you want. It does not matter. The information is already spreading, and every day that passes, more species will read it. More governments will start asking questions. More soldiers will begin to wonder if the Dominion is really as powerful as it claims to be. Kethvan did not take the notebook. He stared at Daniel with an expression that might have been hatred or might have been something else entirely. You are a very dangerous creature, he said finally. I am a school teacher, Daniel replied. I just pay attention. The first hour was dedicated to showing humanity what it faced. The council chamber's walls came alive with holographic images of the Dominion fleet. Thousands of warships filled the space around Daniel, each one large enough to carry the population of a small city. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. 42,000 vessels, Kethvan announced proudly, each one capable of destroying a planet. each one crewed by warriors who have never known defeat. This is the power that stands against you, Daniel wrote in his notebook. He asked, "Is that 42,000 including support ships, or just combat vessels?" The question seemed to confuse Kethvan. "Why does that matter?" "I like to be accurate in my notes," Daniel explained. "Details are important." "Combat vessels only," another council member answered, almost automatically. "Support craft would add another 15,000. "Thank you." Daniel wrote that down too. The next display showed conquered worlds. Beautiful planets that had been reduced to ash and rubble. Cities that had been home to millions, now empty and silent. The images were designed to create terror, and Lavra felt her stomach twist as she watched them. But Daniel just kept writing. "This is Karth 4, Kethvan narrated. "They refused our terms. It took us 6 days to end their civilization. This is Morvax Prime. They tried to fight. Their fleet lasted 11 hours. He paused for effect. "And this is Sentinel Station, where the last survivors of the Veth species made their final stand. We turned their station into a monument, a reminder to others of what happens when you defy the Dominion." Daniel looked up from his notebook. "How many species have you conquered in total?" 12 have been completely eliminated. 34 others serve us as subjects. Kethvan seemed pleased by the question. "We have been building our empire for 3,000 years. You have been traveling between stars for barely 2 decades. Do you understand now what you face?" "I am beginning to," Daniel said. He turned to a new page in his notebook. The next hour focused on the terms of surrender. Humanity would give up control of 3 colony systems near Dominion space. They would pay tribute in rare minerals, sending shipments every standard year. They would accept Dominion observers on Earth itself, officials who would ensure that humanity followed the rules. They would limit their fleet to defensive vessels only. They would share all scientific research with the Dominion before publishing it. And if they refused any of these terms, the Dominion would come. Not to negotiate, not to threaten, simply to end. "You have 3 standard rotations to give us your answer," Kethvan concluded. 3 rotations to decide whether your species lives or dies. Daniel finished writing and looked up. "May I ask some questions?" "You may ask. We may choose not to answer." "Fair enough." Daniel flipped back through his notes. "You mentioned your fleet patrols the border regions. How long does it take for ships to travel from your core worlds to the frontier?" "That is military information." "Of course. Let me try another one." Daniel found a different page. "You said your supply lines extend across 30 systems. Who manages the logistics? Is it a central authority, or do individual fleet commanders handle their own supplies?" One of the younger council members started to answer, but Kethvan silenced him with a gesture. "Why do you ask these questions, human?" "I am curious by nature," Daniel said. "It is a human trait. We like to understand things. You are trying to find weaknesses. I am trying to understand the situation clearly." Daniel's voice remained calm and friendly. "Surely you cannot fault me for wanting accurate information. After all, you brought me here to make a decision. How can I make a good decision without understanding all the facts?" Lavra watched the council members shift uncomfortably on their platforms. She realized what Daniel was doing. Every question he asked planted a seed of doubt. Not in himself, but in them. He was making them wonder if they had already revealed too much. He was making them second-guess their own presentation. Kethvan leaned back in his seat. "Your questions will not help you. Nothing you learn here will change the outcome. Humanity will submit or humanity will burn. Those are your only choices." "I understand," Daniel said. "But humor me a little longer. You mentioned that the Urathi Federation lies on your eastern border. What are your current relations with them?" "The Urathi are irrelevant. They lack the courage to challenge us. But they have not submitted to you either. They will, in time. All species do. Daniel made a note. And the Crystalline Collective? I noticed you did not mention them in your list of subjects. The collective is complicated. Their technology is different from ours. Conquest would be costly. So there are species you choose not to conquer. That is interesting. Daniel wrote something else down. What about internal conflicts? Has the Dominion ever faced rebellion from its subject species? This time, Kethvon's expression changed. For just a moment, something flickered in his ancient eyes. Anger, perhaps. Or something closer to fear. You asked too many questions, he said. I apologize. It is a professional habit. Daniel closed his notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. I believe I have enough information to make my report. Report? One of the council members made a sharp sound. You speak as if you are going home. You are our guest until we decide otherwise. Of course. Daniel smiled. I would not dream of leaving without your permission. But surely you understand that my government will want to know what happened here. I will need to communicate with Earth at some point. All communications from this station are monitored and controlled. I assumed as much. Daniel's smile did not change. Still, I would like to send a message. Just to let them know I am safe. Would that be acceptable? Kethvon studied the human for a long moment. There was something wrong here, something he could not quite identify. This small, fragile creature should be terrified. He should be begging for mercy. Instead, he stood there with that calm smile, asking questions and taking notes, as if he were visiting a museum rather than facing the most powerful empire in the galaxy. You may send one message, Kethvon finally said. It will be reviewed before transmission. Thank you. That is very kind. Daniel bowed his head slightly. I look forward to continuing our conversation tomorrow. As the guards escorted Daniel and Laura out of the chamber, the council members remained in their seats, speaking in low voices. Something had gone wrong with their carefully planned intimidation. The human had not broken. He had not even bent. And somehow, by the end of the session, they were the ones who felt uncertain. That night, Laura could not sleep. She sat in the small room they had been given, staring at the walls and trying to understand what she had witnessed. The quarters were comfortable enough, though clearly designed to remind them they were prisoners. The door was locked from outside. The window showed only darkness. Daniel sat at a small table, writing in his notebook by the light of a single lamp. How can you be so calm? Laura finally asked. They showed us what they do to species that resist. They showed us dead worlds. And you just sat there taking notes. Daniel looked up. His eyes were tired, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Let me tell you a story, he said. When I was young, I had a teacher who was known for being cruel. He would yell at students, embarrass them in front of the class, make them feel small and stupid. Everyone was afraid of him. What happened? One day, I decided to write down everything he said. Every insult, every threat, every cruel word. I filled 3 notebooks over the course of the year. And by the end, I realized something important. Laura waited. He only had about 12 different insults. He repeated the same threats over and over. Once I saw the pattern, he lost his power over me. I stopped being afraid because I understood that his cruelty was not strength. It was just a habit. Daniel turned back to his notebook. The Dominion is the same. They have been conquering for 3,000 years, and in all that time, they have learned exactly one method: intimidation. They show you their fleet. They show you dead worlds. They make demands. And most species, faced with that display, simply give up. But we are not going to give up, Laura said slowly. No, we are not. Daniel smiled. And that is what they do not understand. They have never faced a species that responds to threats by asking questions. They do not know what to do with someone who is more interested in learning than in fearing. The next morning, they were brought back to the council chamber. The same guards, the same high platforms, the same cold atmosphere. But something had changed. The council members seemed less confident, more watchful. They studied Daniel as if he were a puzzle they could not solve. Kethvan spoke first. Have you considered our terms, human? I have. Daniel pulled out his notebook. And I have more questions. We did not bring you here to answer questions. We brought you here to deliver a message to your species. I understand. But the message will be more effective if I understand it completely. Daniel opened to a specific page. Yesterday, you mentioned that your supply lines run through 30 systems. I did some calculations last night. Based on the size of your fleet and the distance between your core worlds and the frontier, you would need to dedicate at least 15% of your ships to supply duties at any given time. Is that accurate? Kethvan did not answer. His eyes narrowed. I also noticed something interesting about your list of conquered species. Daniel continued. All of them were relatively close to your core worlds. The furthest was only 40 light years from Vareth Prime. Earth is nearly 200 light years away. That is quite a distance for supply lines, especially through hostile territory. What are you suggesting? One of the council members demanded. I am not suggesting anything. I am simply observing. Daniel turned another page. Then there is the matter of your relationship with the Arathi. You said they were irrelevant, but your body language suggested otherwise. I noticed the two of you looked away when I asked about them. And when I mentioned the crystalline collective, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lavra watched the council members exchange glances. She understood now what Daniel was doing. He was not just gathering information. He was showing them that he was paying attention, that he was watching them as carefully as they were watching him. Enough games, Kethvan growled. We did not come here to be interrogated by a primitive species. Of course not. Forgive me. Daniel closed his notebook. Let me be direct then. You want Earth to surrender. You want our colonies, our resources, our obedience. And you have made very clear what will happen if we refuse. Yes, but I think there is something you have not considered. Daniel stepped forward, looking up at the High Arbiter without fear. You have been very focused on what you will do to us. You have not asked what we might do to you. Kethvan laughed. It was a cold sound, like rocks falling. What could you possibly do? Your fleet is tiny. Your weapons are primitive. You have been a spacefaring species for 20 years. We have ruled this sector for 3,000. True, Daniel agreed. But we have certain advantages you may have overlooked. Such as? Patience, determination, creativity. Daniel smiled his calm smile. And friends. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Friends? Kethvan repeated. You are not the only ones we have been talking to, High Arbiter. While you were preparing your invasion plans, we were preparing something else entirely. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. This is a communication relay. Very simple technology, by your standards. But it has been transmitting everything from this room since the moment I arrived. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Guards rushed forward, grabbing for the device. Council members shouted orders in their own language. Kethvan rose from his seat. His face twisted with fury, but Daniel just stood there, calm as always, letting them take the relay from his hand. It does not matter if you destroy it, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The transmission is already complete. Everything you showed me yesterday, every threat, Every piece of military information, it has all been received. Not just by Earth, by everyone. Kethvan grabbed Daniel by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Lara screamed and rushed forward, but guards held her back. "What have you done?" The High Arbiter demanded. Daniel could barely breathe, but somehow he managed to keep smiling. "I took notes," he whispered, "and I shared them." The next 3 days were a blur of meetings, arguments, and tense silences. The council debated behind closed doors, while Daniel and Lara waited in their quarters. Guards brought them food and water, but refused to answer any questions. The only sign that something was happening came from the increased activity in the corridors outside. The sound of hurried footsteps and urgent conversations. On the morning of the third day, Kethvan came to see them personally. The High Arbiter looked older than he had during their first meeting. There were new lines on his face, and his movements were slower, more careful. He sat down across from Daniel without waiting for an invitation. "Your coalition grows," he said without introduction. 3 more species have announced their intention to join. Our intelligence reports that even some of our subject worlds are sending secret messages of support. Daniel nodded. He had expected this, though he had not been certain. The galaxy was waiting for someone to go first. We simply gave them that opportunity. You have created chaos. Trade routes are disrupted. Communications are unreliable. There are reports of protests on 6 of our subject worlds. Kethvan's voice was heavy with something that might have been exhaustion. In 3,000 years, we have never faced anything like this. "I am sorry for the disruption," Daniel said, and to Lara's surprise, he sounded like he meant it. "That was not our intention. We did not want war. We did not want conflict. We simply wanted to be left alone. Left alone." Kethvan repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. "Your species has been in space for 20 years. You have established colonies on 7 worlds. You have built a fleet of nearly 2,000 ships. And you expect us to believe you want to be left alone?" "Yes." Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. "I know that is difficult for you to understand. Your empire was built on conquest. You see expansion as natural, as inevitable. But humanity is different. We have spent most of our history fighting each other. We know the cost of war. We know how much it destroys, how long it takes to rebuild. We do not want that for our species or for anyone else." Lara watched the conversation unfold with growing amazement. These were not the words of a diplomat negotiating from strength. These were the words of a teacher, explaining something to a student who had never considered another way of thinking. "What do you want, then?" Kethvan asked. Daniel pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was the same paper he had shown the council during their last meeting, the one outlining humanity's counter-proposal. "We want peace," he said. "Real peace, not the kind that comes from submission. We want trade agreements that benefit both sides. We want cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, the sharing of knowledge and art and ideas. We want to be your partners, not your subjects." Kethvan took the paper and read through it slowly. His expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. "These terms are reasonable," he admitted finally. "More reasonable than I expected from a species we threatened with extinction." "We have no interest in revenge," Daniel said. "What would that accomplish? More death, more destruction, more generations growing up with hatred in their hearts. We have had enough of that on our own world. We do not want to spread it to the stars." The High Arbiter was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more thoughtful. "I have ruled the Dominion for 400 years. I have ordered the destruction of worlds. I have watched species burn because they refused to bow. I have done these things because I believed they were necessary. Because I believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. He looked at Daniel with something approaching curiosity. And now a school teacher from a primitive planet tells me there is another way. Why should I believe you? You should not believe me, Daniel replied. You should test it. Sign this agreement. Give peace a chance to work. If humanity betrays you, if we prove to be as aggressive and dangerous as you feared, then you will have your war. But if we prove to be what we claim, then you will have something the Dominion has never had before. What is that? A friend. Daniel smiled his calm, patient smile. Someone who stands beside you by choice, not by force. Someone who helps you because they want to, not because they are afraid. Someone who tells you the truth even when it is difficult to hear. Kefan stared at the human for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the pen that Daniel offered. If this fails, he said, if your coalition uses this piece to build weapons and plot against us, I will personally lead the fleet that burns your world. I understand, Daniel said, but it will not fail, because we are going to work very hard to make sure it succeeds. The High Arbiter signed the agreement. The war that had seemed inevitable never happened. The coalition of free species became a permanent alliance with humanity at its center. And the Dominion, for the first time in 3,000 years, began to change. It did not happen overnight. There were setbacks and disagreements, moments when everything seemed ready to fall apart. But slowly, carefully, the galaxy learned a new way of existing together. 20 years later, when historians wrote about the moment everything changed, they always focused on the same image, a human ambassador standing before an empire of conquerors, armed with nothing but a notebook and a pen, smiling calmly while they tried to make him afraid. Daniel Cole never thought of himself as a hero. When people asked him about that day on Vareth Prime, he always gave the same answer. I was not brave, he would say. I was just prepared. I listened carefully. I asked good questions. I took very good notes. It was a simple lesson, the kind a school teacher might give to his students. But sometimes, simple lessons are the ones that change the world.